The dust settled on the empty platform as Katherine Porter clutched her worn leather satchel, her knuckles white with determination. The whistle of the last train to Denver echoed through the New Mexico territory, fading into the distance as it disappeared over the horizon. She had waited 3 days, watching every train that pulled into Whisper Creek Station, searching every face that stepped onto the platform. Now there were no more trains coming today. Katherine's shoulders slumped as she realized her brother's letter promising to meet her had amounted to nothing. "You can stop waiting now," a deep voice said from behind her. Katherine turned to see a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the kind lines around his mouth as he offered her a gentle smile. "I wasn't waiting for you," she replied, lifting her chin. The stranger chuckled. "Didn't say you were, madam, but that was the last train until tomorrow. Station's closing up." It was 1878, and Katherine Porter had traveled all the way from Boston with dreams of a new beginning. At 22, she had already endured more loss than most people twice her age. The war had taken her father. Consumption had claimed her mother 2 winters past. Now her brother Michael, her only remaining family, had sent for her to join him in his new life out west. "My brother was supposed to meet me," she said, hating how her voice trembled. "He lives in Whisper Creek, or so his letters said." The man's expression shifted. "Michael Porter," Katherine's heart leapt. "Yes, do you know him?" "I'm Hank Xavier," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm the marshal in these parts, your brother. I'm afraid I have some news that might be difficult to hear." The world seemed to tilt beneath Katherine's feet. "Is he dead?" Marshal Xavier shook his head quickly. "No, madam. But he's not in Whisper Creek anymore. Rode out with a cattle drive about 3 weeks back. Left word he'd be gone 4 months at least." Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. Her brother had abandoned her without so much as a telegram to warn her not to come. Her carefully laid plans crumbled around her like dried clay. "I see," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Well, I suppose I shall have to find accommodation until his return." The marshal shifted uncomfortably. "That might be a challenge, Miss Porter. We don't have a proper hotel in town yet. There's the saloon," but he stopped abruptly, clearly uncomfortable suggesting such an establishment to a lady. "I understand," Katherine said stiffly. 4 months. She had $12 to her name. It might as well have been nothing. "There's my sister's boarding house," Marshal Xavier said after a moment's thought. "She might have a room, and she's always looking for help with the cooking and cleaning, if you're willing to work, that is." Katherine straightened her spine. "I am certainly not afraid of hard work, Marshal Xavier." A smile tugged at his lips. "Never suggested you were. Come on, I'll walk you there before it gets dark." As they walked through the dusty streets of Whisper Creek, Katherine took in the raw, unfinished quality of the frontier town. Back in Boston, she had been a schoolteacher, surrounded by brick buildings and cobblestone streets. Here, the buildings were primarily wood, the roads mere dirt tracks between them. "How long have you been marshal?" Katherine asked, trying to distract herself from her uncertain future. "Going on 3 years now," Hank replied. "Came out here after the war. Needed open spaces after what I saw." Katherine nodded. So many men had come home broken from that terrible conflict. "You fought for the Union?" "Yes, madam. 14th Connecticut Infantry." They walked in silence for a moment, the weight of shared national tragedy hanging between them. "Your brother spoke of you often," Hank said suddenly. "Said his little sister was the smartest person in all of Massachusetts. Said you had a way with words that could charm the birds from the trees." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "Michael always did exaggerate." "I don't know about that," Hank said quietly. Seems to me like a woman brave enough to travel across the country on her own might be pretty remarkable. They reached a 2-story wooden house with a small sign reading Xavier Boarding House hanging from the porch. Compared to the other buildings in town, it was well maintained, with curtains in the windows and flowers growing in boxes beneath them. A woman with the same storm-gray eyes as the marshal opened the door before they could knock. "Hank, I was wondering when you'd stop by today." Her gaze shifted to Katherine. "And who might this be?" "Katherine Porter," Hank said. "Michael Porter's sister. She just arrived on the afternoon train, but Michael's gone with the cattle drive." The woman's expression softened with understanding. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in, come in. I'm Hannah Xavier. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll get you sorted." Katherine followed Hannah into a warm kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. For the first time since stepping off the train, she felt a small sense of relief. "Now," Hannah said, pouring her a cup of coffee, "let's figure out what to do with you until your brother returns." Over the next several days, Katherine settled into a routine at the boarding house. Hannah was a widow who had followed her brother west after losing her husband at Gettysburg. She was kind but practical, and the two women quickly developed a mutual respect. Katherine helped with the cooking and cleaning, and in exchange, Hannah provided room and board. In the evenings, Katherine would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. It was on one such evening, a week after her arrival, that Marshal Xavier joined her. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please do," Katherine replied, noting how the dying sunlight caught in his dark hair, revealing threads of copper she hadn't noticed before. "How are you finding Whisper Creek?" Hank asked, stretching his long legs out before him. "It's different," Katherine admitted. "Everything is. Bigger somehow. The sky, the mountains, even the silence." Hank nodded. "That's what drew me here after the war. All that open space helps a man breathe again." "Did you know my brother well?" Katherine asked, the question that had been nagging at her since their first meeting. Hank considered the question. "Well enough, I suppose. He worked at the livery stable, had a good way with horses. Kept to himself mostly, but was always ready to lend a hand when needed." Katherine smiled sadly. "That sounds like Michael, always helpful but never one to share his own troubles." "Sounds like someone else I'm getting to know," Hank said with a gentle smile that made Katherine's cheeks warm. "I hardly think we've had enough conversation for you to know me, Marshal Xavier." "Hank," he corrected. "And maybe that's something we should remedy." Before Katherine could respond, a commotion from the street drew their attention. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. Hank was on his feet immediately. "Excuse me," he said, already moving toward the street. Katherine watched as he intercepted the rider, their conversation too distant to hear. Whatever news the man brought, it caused Hank's posture to stiffen. After a brief exchange, Hank ran toward the jailhouse. Minutes later, he emerged with a rifle and mounted a horse that the rider had brought. Without a glance back toward the boarding house, he galloped out of town with several other men who had quickly assembled. Hannah appeared at the door behind Katherine. "Trouble?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I don't know," Katherine replied. "A rider came and Hank left in a hurry." Hannah's face grew serious. "That's Billy from the Reynolds Ranch. If he's riding in like that, something bad's happened." It was nearly midnight when Hank returned. Katherine, unable to sleep with worry, had been sitting in the kitchen with Hannah, drinking tea and listening to the older woman's stories about the early days of Whisper Creek. The sound of horses made them both look up. Hannah moved to the window. "It's Hank," she said with relief, then her voice sharpened. "And he's hurt." They rushed outside to find Hank dismounting slowly, his left arm held stiffly against his side. In the lantern light, Katherine could see the dark stain of blood on his shirt. "It's nothing," he said as Hannah fussed over him. "Just a graze." "Bullet grazes aren't nothing," Hannah retorted. "Katherine, help me get him inside." Together they guided him to the kitchen, where Hannah quickly gathered medical supplies. Katherine helped Hank remove his vest and shirt, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the warmth that flooded her cheeks at the sight of his bare chest. "What happened?" Hannah asked as she cleaned the wound, which was indeed a bullet graze along his ribs. "Reynolds Ranch was hit by the Carson gang," Hank said through gritted teeth. "They've been rustling cattle across 3 counties. We caught up with them, but they were expecting us. There was a firefight." "Did you catch them?" Katherine asked, handing Hannah clean bandages. Hank's eyes met hers and she saw a mixture of frustration and determination. "Not all of them. Got 2, but Carson and his brother escaped. They'll be back." "Not tonight they won't," Hannah said firmly, "and you need rest." After Hannah had bandaged the wound, she insisted Hank stay at the boarding house rather than return to his sparse room above the jailhouse. Too exhausted to argue, he accepted. As Hannah went to prepare a room, Katherine and Hank were left alone in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I did very little," Katherine replied. "Hannah is the one with medical knowledge. Not just for tonight, for being here with Hannah. She worries about me, and it helps knowing she's not alone while I'm out chasing outlaws." Katherine felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. "She's been very kind to me." "Kindness runs in the family," Hank said with a small smile that transformed his tired face. Over the next few weeks, Katherine found herself spending more time with Hank. Initially, it was to check on his wound, but soon they were sharing morning coffee before he went on his rounds or evening conversations on the porch. She learned about his childhood in Connecticut, his time in the war, and his journey west seeking peace. In turn, she told him about her life in Boston, her love of teaching, and her complicated relationship with her brother. "Michael always had wanderlust," she explained one evening as they watched the sunset. "Even as a child, he was forever looking toward the horizon. After our mother died, there was nothing keeping him in Boston." "Except you," Hank said quietly. Katherine sighed. "I think that's precisely why he left. He couldn't bear to see me grieving. Michael deals with pain by running from it." "And how do you deal with pain, Katherine Porter?" She considered the question. "I endure it, I acknowledge it, and then I try to build something new from what remains." Hank's gaze was thoughtful. "That takes courage." "Not courage," she corrected. "Necessity." As June turned to July, Katherine found unexpected fulfillment in Whisper Creek. Word had spread that she had been a teacher in Boston, and soon parents were asking if she would consider teaching their children. With Hannah's encouragement, Katherine converted the boarding house parlor into a makeshift schoolroom during the day. It was during one such lesson that the Carson gang returned to Whisper Creek. Katherine was explaining basic arithmetic to a group of 8 children when the sound of gunfire erupted in the street. Instinctively, she hurried the children away from the windows and into the kitchen at the back of the house. "Stay down and be very quiet," she instructed, her voice calm despite her racing heart. "Mrs. Xavier will look after you." Hannah, who had been baking bread, immediately took charge of the frightened children. "Katherine, don't you dare," she began, but Katherine was already moving toward the front of the house. From the window, she could see several men on horseback firing into the air and at the buildings. Hank and his deputy, a young man named Thomas, were taking cover behind water troughs, returning fire. One of the outlaws spotted movement in the boarding house window and raised his rifle. Without thinking, Katherine ducked away just as glass shattered around her. "Katherine." Hank's voice carried across the street, heavy with fear. "I'm all right," she called back, staying low. The gunfight continued, with the outlaws gradually being driven back by Hank and the townspeople who had taken up arms to defend their community. Katherine watched in horror as one of the outlaws circled behind the buildings, clearly intending to flank Hank's position. Without hesitation, Katherine grabbed Hannah's shotgun from above the fireplace and moved to the back door. She had never fired a gun before, but Michael had often spoken of how their father had been an excellent marksman during his military service. She hoped some of that talent might be inherited. As the outlaw rounded the corner, Katherine stepped onto the back porch and raised the shotgun. "Stop right there," she commanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man froze, surprise evident on his face before it twisted into a sneer. "Well, ain't you a brave little schoolmarm," he drawled, reaching for his pistol. Katherine fired. The recoil knocked her backward, but the shot struck true enough, hitting the man in the shoulder. He fell with a scream that alerted Hank to his presence. Within moments, Hank was there, disarming the injured outlaw and securing him with handcuffs. His eyes met Katherine's, wide with a mixture of shock, admiration, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, quickly checking her for injuries. "No," Katherine said, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "The children are safe," Hannah said from the doorway. "Thanks to you." The Carson gang was defeated that day, with 3 captured and 2 killed in the firefight. Only Jake Carson himself had escaped, but with his gang dismantled, he was unlikely to return to Whisper Creek. That evening, after the children had been collected by their relieved parents and the town had begun to settle, Hank found Katherine sitting alone on the porch, staring at her still trembling hands. "You saved my life today," he said without preamble, sitting beside her. Katherine shook her head. "I acted without thinking. It was foolish, brave," Hank corrected, "and skillful. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "I didn't," Katherine admitted. "It was my first time holding a gun. I just couldn't watch you die." Hank was silent for a long moment. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Katherine looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "Because I care for you, Hank Xavier, more than I should, perhaps, for someone who is waiting for her brother to return." Hank reached out, taking her trembling hands in his warm, steady ones. "I've been thinking about that, Katherine, about your brother." Katherine felt a chill of apprehension. "What about him?" "I received word yesterday. The cattle drive Michael joined. It's not coming back to Whisper Creek. They're taking the herd all the way to Montana territory." Katherine felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her. "Montana, but that's hundreds of miles from here." Hank nodded, his expression gentle but serious. "Your brother isn't coming back, Katherine. At least not for a very long time." The realization settled over her like a heavy blanket. Michael had never intended for her to join him permanently. He had brought her west, away from the painful memories of Boston, but he hadn't planned to stay with her. "I see," she said, her voice small. "Do you want to go to Montana?" Hank asked, his grip on her hands tightening slightly. "If you do, I'll help you arrange passage when it's safe." Katherine looked out at the town that had become her home in such a short time, at the mountains that had begun to feel like old friends, at the man beside her, whose presence had become as essential to her as breathing. "No," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I don't think I do." Relief flooded Hank's features. "Good," he said simply, "because I'd like you to stay, not for your brother, for yourself. For the children who adore their new teacher. For Hannah, who thinks of you as the daughter she never had." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "For me, who can't imagine Whisper Creek or my life without you in it." Katherine felt tears well in her eyes. "That's quite a declaration, Marshal Xavier." "I'm just getting started, Miss Porter," he replied with a smile that warmed her from within. As summer turned to autumn, Catherine's makeshift school grew into a proper establishment. The town council, impressed by her dedication during the Carson gang attack, voted to convert an unused storefront into a schoolhouse. Hank helped with the construction, spending his free hours building desks and a blackboard frame. Their courtship progressed with the measured pace of people who understood the value of time. Evening walks, Sunday picnics after church, and quiet conversations on the boarding house porch became the framework of their deepening relationship. In October, a letter arrived from Michael. He was in Helena, Montana, working as a wrangler on a large ranch. His letter was full of apologies for not being in Whisper Creek when she arrived and explanations about opportunities he couldn't pass up. Between the lines, Katherine read what he couldn't say directly, that the restlessness that had driven him from Boston still hadn't abated. "He's still running," she told Hank as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name. The aspens were turning gold, their leaves shimmering in the late afternoon sun. "Some men never stop," Hank replied. "They're always looking for something over the next hill." "And what about you?" Katherine asked. "Are you still looking?" Hank stopped walking and turned to face her. The autumn light caught in his eyes, making them shine like polished silver. "I found what I was looking for the day you didn't get on that last train out of Whisper Creek." Katherine's heart swelled. "I was so angry that day. Angry at Michael for not being there, angry at myself for being so dependent on him. And now," she smiled, reaching up to touch his face, "now I'm grateful. If he had been there, I might never have met you, never found this place where I belong." Hank covered her hand with his own. "Katherine Porter, I've faced down outlaws and survived a war, but nothing has ever frightened me as much as the thought of telling you what's in my heart." Katherine held her breath as he continued. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your courage and your kindness. I love how you face each day with determination. I love that you created a school out of nothing because children needed to learn. I love that you picked up a shotgun to protect others without a thought for yourself." He took a deep breath. "And I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Joy bubbled up within Katherine like a spring. "Are you certain you want to tie yourself to a woman who can't shoot straight?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Hank laughed. "I'll teach you. Though I have to say, for a first attempt, you did remarkably well." "Yes," Katherine said. "Yes, you did well, or yes, you'll marry me." "Both," she replied, rising on her toes to kiss him. They were married on Christmas Eve in the small church that had been built that summer. Hannah, beaming with joy, stood as Katherine's witness. The schoolchildren sang carols, and the entire town turned out to celebrate. As they exchanged vows, Katherine thought about the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The grief that had sent her brother fleeing across the country. The misplaced letter that might have warned her he wouldn't be in Whisper Creek. The last train that she had watched leave without her. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride." As Hank's lips met hers, sealing their promise to each other, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be. The winter passed in a blur of happiness as they settled into married life. Hank had built a small house at the edge of town, with large windows that looked out toward the mountains. Katherine continued teaching, her school now boasting 15 regular students. In the evenings, she and Hank would sit by the fire, reading or talking about their days. Spring brought news that the territory governor was considering Whisper Creek for a county seat, which would mean expansion and more resources. Hank was offered the position of county sheriff, a promotion that recognized his skill and dedication. "What do you think?" he asked Katherine as they discussed the offer over breakfast. "I think you'd be excellent," she said honestly. You're fair and people respect you, but it would mean more danger." Hank nodded, understanding her concern. "It would, but it would also mean more stability for our future. For our family." Catherine's hand instinctively went to her stomach, where their first child was growing. She had only told Hank the news the previous evening, and they were still adjusting to the idea of becoming parents. "Our family," she repeated, savoring the words. "I never thought I would have this, you know. After losing my parents, watching Michael drift away, I thought I was destined to be alone." Hank reached across the table to take her hand. "You'll never be alone again, Katherine Xavier. I promise you that." In June, almost exactly a year after Katherine had arrived in Whisper Creek, another letter came from Michael. He was in California now, having left Montana during the harsh winter. His letter was filled with descriptions of the Pacific Ocean and the opportunities in the booming coastal cities. Katherine read it aloud to Hank as they sat on their porch, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "He sounds happy," Hank observed when she finished reading. "Yes," Katherine agreed. "In his way. Michael needs movement like we need air. I used to find it frustrating, but now I understand it's just who he is." "Do you ever regret not following him, not seeing these places he describes?" Katherine considered the question, her hand resting on her growing belly. "No," she said finally. "I've found my place in the world. It's here with you, with our students, with the child we're going to have. Michael is searching for something he may never find, but I've stopped searching." Hank smiled, taking her hand. "Because you found it, because it found me," she corrected. "That day at the train station, when you said I could stop waiting." "Best thing I ever said," Hank murmured, leaning in to kiss her softly. Their daughter, Elizabeth Hannah Xavier, was born on a crisp September morning with the first dusting of snow on the distant mountains. She had her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her first powerful cry. As Katherine held her newborn daughter, with Hank beside her, tears of joy streaming unashamedly down his face, she felt a sense of completion she had never known possible. "She's perfect," Hank whispered, gently touching his daughter's tiny hand, "just like her mother." "Hardly perfect," Katherine laughed weakly, exhausted but elated, "but completely loved." "That's what matters most," Hannah said from the doorway where she had been assisting the doctor. "Being loved completely." The years passed with the rhythm of frontier life. Whisper Creek grew from a small settlement into a proper town, with a bank, a general store, and eventually a train station of its own. Katherine's school expanded into a two-room schoolhouse with another teacher to help with the growing number of students. Hank served as county sheriff with distinction, bringing law and order to a territory that was gradually transitioning toward statehood. Elizabeth, or Beth as they called her, was joined by a brother, Michael, named for the uncle he had never met but who sent packages of seashells and stories from his travels around the world. Katherine maintained correspondence with her brother, sharing news of her life and family, but he never returned to Whisper Creek. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hank surprised Katherine by taking her to Denver. It was her first trip on a train since arriving in Whisper Creek, and as they pulled into the station, memories of that fateful day came flooding back. "What are you thinking about?" Hank asked, noticing her wistful expression as they disembarked. "I was thinking about waiting," she said. "About how sometimes the best things come to us when we stop looking for them elsewhere." Hank smiled, the lines around his eyes deeper now but still crinkling in the same way that had first charmed her. "Are you saying I was worth the wait, Mrs. Xavier?" Katherine reached up to touch his face, now bearing touches of silver at the temples but still as handsome as the day they met. "Every moment," she assured him. That night, In their hotel room, after they had attended the theater and dined in a fine restaurant, Hank presented her with a small velvet box. Inside was a brooch, gold with small diamonds arranged in the shape of a star. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed. "It reminded me of the stars over Whisper Creek the night I asked you to marry me," Hank said, "and of how finding you was like finding my North Star, my guide home." Katherine felt tears well in her eyes. "How is it that after all these years, you still find new ways to make me fall in love with you all over again?" Hank gathered her in his arms. "It's easy," he murmured against her hair. "I just remember that day at the station. You looked so lost, so determined not to show it. And all I wanted was to see you smile." "You've given me a lifetime of smiles," Katherine said, rising on her toes to kiss him, "and tears of joy and moments of wonder. And it's only the beginning," Hank promised. When they returned to Whisper Creek, life resumed its pleasant routine. Beth, now 9, was showing a talent for mathematics that amazed her teachers. 6-year-old Michael had his namesake's adventurous spirit, but tempered with his father's sense of responsibility. In the spring of their 11th year of marriage, as Katherine was planting her garden, a familiar figure appeared at their gate, older, weathered by sun and wind, but unmistakable. "Michael," she gasped, dropping her trowel. Her brother removed his hat, revealing hair streaked with premature gray. "Hello, Katie," he said, using the childhood nickname she hadn't heard in years. Katherine crossed the yard in quick strides and threw her arms around him. "I can't believe you're here." "Why didn't you write that you were coming?" Michael returned her embrace awkwardly. "Wasn't sure I would make it or if I'd be welcome." Katherine drew back to look at him. "Of course you're welcome. This is your home too." A sad smile crossed Michael's face. "No, Katie, this is your home. I just wanted to see it, to see you, to make sure you were happy." "I am," she assured him. "So very happy, but why now, after all these years?" Michael's gaze shifted to the horizon, a habit she remembered well from childhood. "Been thinking a lot lately about what I've been chasing all these years. Realized I might have been running from the wrong things, running toward the wrong places." Katherine took his arm. "Come inside. Meet your niece and nephew, and Hank. You'll like him." Michael hesitated. "I'm not staying long, just passing through." Katherine felt a familiar pang of disappointment, but it was tempered by years of understanding her brother's nature. "Stay as long as you can. We have a lot to catch up on." That evening, as the children peppered their uncle with questions about his adventures, Katherine watched the interaction between Michael and Hank. There was initial wariness on both sides, but it soon gave way to a mutual respect. Later, after the children were in bed, the 3 adults sat on the porch with glasses of whiskey. "You've built a good life here," Michael said to his sister. "Better than anything I could have offered you." "It found me when I wasn't looking for it," Katherine replied. "Sometimes the best things do." Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been everywhere from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Seen things most people only read about, but I'm beginning to think you might be the one who found the real treasure." Hank's hand found Katherine's in the darkness. "I'm the fortunate one," he said. "Your sister has brought more joy into my life than I ever thought possible." Michael stayed for 2 weeks, the longest he had remained in one place in years, according to his own admission. He taught Beth and Michael to fish in the creek, helped Hank repair the barn roof, and attended Katherine's school to tell the students about his travels. On the day of his departure, as they stood at the train station, the very same one where Katherine had once waited in vain for him, Michael embraced his sister tightly. "I'm proud of you, Katie," he said. "You've made a real difference in this town." "So could you," she replied. "If you wanted to stay." Michael shook his head. "Some people are meant to put down roots, others are meant to carry seeds from place to place." He smiled. but I might come back this way again if that's all right." "More than all right," Katherine assured him. "This will always be a home for you whenever you need one." As the train pulled away, Katherine felt Hank's arm slip around her waist. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I'm not the same woman who once waited at this station, heartbroken because her brother didn't arrive. I understand him better now, and I have so much more in my life." Hank pressed a kiss to her temple. "Speaking of which, I believe we promised the children ice cream if they finish their chores." Katherine smiled, turning away from the departing train. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting." As they walked home together, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the desperate young woman who had waited until the last train left, to the confident wife, mother, and teacher she had become. All because a kind-eyed marshal had told her she could stop waiting. Life in Whisper Creek continued to evolve. The territory became a state, bringing new changes and opportunities. The children grew. Beth eventually followed in her mother's footsteps and became a teacher, while young Michael combined his uncle's wanderlust with his father's sense of duty by joining the U.S. Marshal Service. Michael Porter returned to visit twice more over the years, each time staying a little longer, before news reached them that he had passed away in San Francisco. Among his possessions was a journal filled with detailed accounts of his travels, addressed to his sister with a note asking her to share the stories with her students. It was his way of bringing a bit of the wider world to the town that had given his sister the home he couldn't. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Hank and Katherine stood once more on the platform of the Whisper Creek train station. Gray-haired now but still standing tall, Hank took his wife's hand as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "30 years ago you told me to stop waiting," Katherine mused. "It was the best advice I ever received." Hank smiled, the deep lines around his eyes crinkling with affection. "I was just being practical. The station was closing," Katherine laughed. "Always the pragmatist." "But it changed everything for me, for us." "For the better, I hope?" Hank asked, though he knew the answer. "For the better in every way," she assured him. "I stopped waiting for life to happen to me and started building the life I wanted instead." Hank raised her hand to his lips. "And I got to be part of that life. The luckiest break a man ever got." As the last rays of sun disappeared behind the mountains, they turned toward home, walking hand in hand down the street they had first traveled together 3 decades before. Their path had not always been easy, but it had been rich with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction that comes from finding exactly where you belong. And Katherine, who had once waited anxiously at this very station for a future that never arrived, was profoundly grateful for the one that had found her instead when she stopped waiting and started living.